So you're talking to me earlier about providing for the family.
Every man wants to provide for his family. That's the natural thing to do. But being an entrepreneur, I have a lot of livelihoods at stake. So it means a lot more to me. I put in, every day I have to give 110%.
Now, have you ever thought about what if you fail?
That's not an option.
What'd you learn from this experience?
I learned that no matter how great your product is, that if the customer doesn't want it and the wholesaler doesn't want it and the demand for your product is not there, then you're kind of out of luck. You got to go in a new direction and listen to what they're asking for.
Did you ever think this would happen?
No.
So, you currently produce 25% in the States.
Yes, we do.
So, what would it take to make that more?
Is there anything more American than baseball? Well, maybe consumerism, or possibly entertainment. But both of those things happen at a baseball game. You might say that spending money for the sake of entertaining ourselves is what we do best in this country. There's also a deep sense of nostalgia that comes along with the day at the ballpark. There's a unique, patriotic spirit underlying the game that brings everyone together, not unlike a backyard family barbecue or fireworks on the 4th of July. But I wonder, how often do we really think about all the different elements that go into making a baseball game? Just how American is America's pastime these days? The truth is, in an increasingly global economy, it takes manufacturers from all over the world to make the things necessary to have a baseball game. While as consumers, we often consider the price of admission, or the overpriced hot dogs in terms of our own enjoyment, have you ever really thought about the people involved in the game beyond the coaches and players? What about the folks who make the bats, the gloves, the baseballs, or even the souvenirs in the gift shop? Your purchase of that ticket affects their livelihoods. The pattern holds true in all the purchases we make in our everyday lives. And as the marketplace becomes saturated with companies trying to gain a leg up on one another, the manner in which your money is spent becomes even more crucial to determining how and where those goods are created. So no matter if you realize it or not, we all have a relationship with the things that we make and buy in this country. And I think it's safe to say that the first step of any relationship is just to realize that you're in one.
At our peak, I believe we were making like 1.6 million tons of steel a year. We had 6,400 employees. At the time the plant shut down, probably less than 1,200.
When you think of manufacturing in Detroit,
Most people think of one, final assembly line where a bunch of parts come in and a car comes out. But what was amazing about Detroit in its prime is you had all the steel plants in the early processes, and then you had all the parts plants. You had rubber plants where you were processing and making tires. You had glass forges where you were making, all your windshields and your windows for your cars. You had all these other industries, and you literally had communities that sprung up around these communities. Cities like Melvindale and River Rouge, Ecorse. These were cities that were built and planned by a lot of the early auto executives.
We got greedy, and that's why we're where we're at now. That's the sick part about this whole place here. You walk through it and you see what it was, and you feel that it could be better. You wished it would be here, but you have no control over that. But the part for me is, I seen how many people this place could employ. I see how much more it could put back to the community. I see how much more it could make the economy in this area get better, and you have no control over to change it. Making things, manufacturing things, rather than buying it, taking a blank pipe, a solid piece of steel, and making it into a shaft. It was done right here, day in and day out, and by far by some of the best machinists you'd probably ever find.
These were jobs that people from all over the world wanted to come and experience. And so you weren't just buying into the idea of working in a factory, you were buying into a piece of the American dream.
How did a place like this end up looking like a post-apocalyptic ruin? This ending wasn't written overnight. It's more of a product of the times and a lack of understanding of how the relationship between manufacturing and consumption went sour, without the most important party, you, even being aware of it. This city, and hundreds of others across the country just like it, are the remnants of the latest chapter in American history. When economic times have gotten tough in the past, a quick look at the history books reminds us that American manufacturing has been counted upon even during our darkest times. The Great Depression had the country in what seemed like a bottomless freefall, but the call to arms of World War II brought about change. Overnight, manufacturing plants went from building cars to tanks, from industrial tools to weapons of war. And we won. Over the next 30 years, the country's middle-class backbone, fortified through a central labor movement and good old-fashioned American ingenuity, gave rise to a wave of economic consumption. New homes and vehicles, as well as appliances like refrigerators, washing machines, ovens, and vacuums, made a comfortable life easier to attain. When the 1960s blasted in, the new frontier of space was explored and traversed in rockets made in the USA. And after one small step, even the world as we knew it wasn't a boundary anymore.
After World War II, the United States was almost 50% of the global economy. We were it. We had the manufacturing base for the world.
There's a name for this period that you're talking about now, World War II through about 1980, and it is called the Great Compression, okay? And what it is it's, sadly, it is looking like a historical blip, but what it is it is a situation where you had policies in place that created a very large middle class.
Those were good jobs. They created, in many ways, the American dream. People, could work their way up, get a job, a steady job, benefits. They could count on health care, and they could have a career.
It's something that we look back and I think we're quite stunned at how that happened and how it happened so quickly. But it showed both the ingenuity, the imagination of our workers, their tremendous productivity and pride, and also what we can do as a country if we put our mind to it.
Manufacturing is the process of turning raw materials into finished goods. And during the height of American manufacturing, there were clusters of factories producing anything and everything possible. 80% of the world's automobiles were built in cities like Detroit. Cities like Pittsburgh were churning out heavy equipment and materials like steel for new construction. Maine was known for its shoe manufacturing. The South was a haven for the production of textiles and furniture. Appliances like refrigerators, ovens, washing machines came out of the heartland, while the West Coast was filling the skies with airplanes and commercial jetliners. All across the U.S., these sectors and more provided the world with some of the highest quality goods ever manufactured. At its peak in 1979, manufacturing employed over 19 million workers. Of course, that number doesn't reflect all the jobs impacted by the presence of a strong manufacturing base. Many other jobs were created to form the links along the production chain. Take a baseball bat, a Louisville Slugger wooden bat to be exact. It starts in a New York forest.
I work in the woods primarily looking for timber that can be suitable for use for making baseball bats. You look around the woods there and you see that these are marked trees, and we're certainly not harvesting every tree. We're marking trees that are ready to be harvested.
Lumberjacks are employed to harvest the wood.
Well, first they had to go get certified through Game of Logging. Had to take 4 courses, get certified, bought a skidder, and just been in it ever since.
Then truck drivers are hired to deliver those trees to a mill.
This is the area right here along the Pennsylvania-New York borderline where the best timber grows in the United States.
Jobs for mill workers are created to transform the trees into billets.
I enjoy working there. I've been talking about retiring, but I don't really want to yet. I just turned 65 years old the 1st of October. I think I'll probably stick it out for a couple more years. It's treating me pretty good. I ain't real rich, but I make a living.
Once the billets are made, they are loaded up and more truck drivers deliver them to factory workers who manufacture them into bats. Then there are more jobs created to market the bat, and retail jobs to sell the bat.
When you do see a Louisville Slugger bat, you know that a lot of different employees were necessary in order to get that bat from the forest down into the player's hands.
This example reminds us that it takes many people in the production chain to make a bat, or any product for that matter. And how often do we really think about the personal stories involved in the manufacturing process? We have a rich history of manufacturing, and while it seems to have lost some of its luster, new chapters are still being written every day. Even when times are tough, and manufacturing isn't the most popular career choice, there are businesses and companies still carrying the torch in the face of stacking odds.
You know, I always said our motto was, you dream it, we build it. And we've pretty well done that in the steel industry, from trailers, commercial, industrial, military, sculptures that weigh 350,000 pounds. You know, anything, I think anything is possible. I always say, we've been to the moon, don't tell me we can't do it.
The first time I saw his logo, You Dream It, We Build It, I loved it because it was who he was, who he is. Mark was different growing up than the rest of us. We would be playing outside, and he was always in the garage tinkering with motors and engines and building go-karts. And
he could take an engine apart, and I wouldn't have to show him too much. And 7, 8 years old, he was in his little dune buggy. He had little things he fixed. My snowblower, my tractors he worked on. He knew how to adjust those engines, and he was something.
He could build anything. My friends would come over, and they would be amazed at what he would do.
And I can always remember the man saying, he's gonna be something. He's gonna be something someday. It didn't surprise me when Mark started a business out of my father's garage. It was very in line with who he was. He was fixing lawnmowers.
And I made my first tag, Mark Small Engine Repair, and I'd put that tag on at the end, and there goes that product, and word started to spread.
They would come to our house, drop things off, he'd deliver them. He would pretty much fix anything that anybody needed.
He's good, actually, at everything he does, you know. And there was just not enough money in what he did.
I said, we got to do something else. And Mark said, well, Dad, let me open a welding shop up. It was his decision. I said, well, I used to be a welder. I showed you how to weld, but I said, you got to go to school to be a better welder. So he really, really learned quick.
General Welding was up for sale by the original owner. I think that the owner might have contacted Mark and put the idea into his head of possibly buying the business.
I talked to my dad. He said, I don't got the money, but I'd take a second mortgage on a house. And my mom wasn't totally for that, but Dad said, no, I'll do it. You got to take a chance.
This is Mark's new building, 991 Maple Road in Helma. Sisler's is doing the drilling for the base.
So I opened up August 1st, 1989 was my day. The papers were signed over on General Welding. The name was mine and equipment and the inventory. And that Monday, life changed because all of a sudden I'm into truck equipment. I'm selling snowplows. I'm taking care of small engine repairs. My 250 customers, or 500 I think I had at that time.
But we did all the little jobs, and the little jobs brought the big jobs. You can see our experience was, how we cared, how you bothered, how we delivered to them. And little by little, after year after year after year, it really went good.
So things are going good. I'm up to about 69 employees.
He's a good boss, without a doubt.
He is. He's probably one of my better bosses that I've had.
He's a lot of fun to be around. Easy going. He's got a real good even keel about him.
It's just kind of like one big family to me. That's the way it seems.
Mark's willing to take the risk.
Things are really looking good.
The business would be nowhere near what it is today if it was myself.
This was my dream to grow it, and who knows, sky's the limit.
In my early childhood, when we were traveling through New England and going to the farm, we often went through small New England towns, and it never left. It's just sort of what I think of when I think of New England and when I think of Americana. I took that iconic image and made it my own and started making different jewelry pieces that are representational to me of what that experience was. It made me happy all the time to sit in the corner of a room and to make my things. And so I made more and more pieces and I sold more and more, and I realized, well, I'm gonna make a go of it. I'm gonna quit my job and I'm gonna see if I can make my jewelry for a living. And so one day I just didn't renew my teaching contract, and I started selling. So I'm at a wholesale show, and I'm selling my Americana line as well as the other lines that I was doing at the time, and the Smithsonian buyer walks in, and she was very excited to meet me and very excited to see the whole collection. Very big moment. To have the Smithsonian in my booth, and so I was concentrating, even though I was like really excited, trying not to feel like, you know, I'm a little fish in a big pond. And I got this big, huge order from the Smithsonian. It was great. Things really explode. So I started to hire people. I had hired people prior to that, but I needed to hire more. So things were going really well, and I was at another wholesale show selling my things, and there's Suzanne, the buyer from the Smithsonian. She looks up at me and she said, you know, Mary, do you realize that you sell more work at the Smithsonian than any other single artist? It was a really big moment, and a moment where I realized that, wow, this isn't just something you make in your attic. This isn't some little business that just kind of like, oh, it's just whatever. This is actually really working, and I'm actually making money. People really like it. I'm really selling this, and I'm really making a living doing what's inside of me and what's inspirational to me. And it was a very big moment in my career to be able to stand in front of all those buyers at once and sell my work.
the country's realizing now is that making things is important. The reason making things is important is it employs a lot of people, it gives you expertise that other markets want, and it teaches you to innovate.
Not everybody's going to be a rocket scientist. Not everybody's going to be a doctor. Not everybody's going to be a lawyer. We're going to have jobs for people that want to do something, want to use their hands. It's a philosophically bad choice to keep going after the dollar and only the dollar, as opposed to investing in our future.
You know, we have a complicated manufacturing footprint. We produce in 6 different countries and well over 20 facilities. But we're still the company that makes athletic shoes here in the U.S. in 5 different factories.
On a weekly basis, I hear from at least someone who's concerned about, are we going to be here? Are we staying? Is this for real? All I can tell them is we keep doing it each and every day, and our customers are happy. We're making more sales. We're making more partnerships with different organizations, different retailers that want more of our business, and that's why we're here. If it were only about making money, another choice might be made. But it's not about just that. It's about believing in something.
You know, what's driven U.S. companies to outsource and offshore their manufacturing, they're not bad reasons. Labor rates are less expensive, but it's also a less complicated market, many times less complicated markets to produce in. So we understand why businesses offshore their production. We also fundamentally believe that knowing how to make things and making them here is critically important to the long-term health of our company, and I believe to this country.
Historically and presently, manufacturing provides an important source of jobs to the overall economy. And if you listen to the political landscape of the last few decades, it's been a long time since anyone in power has really been against it.
Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates.
Where Made in the USA is recognized around the world as the symbol of quality and progress. Everything from our farms and factories to our workshops and production lines, all that is needed to produce and deliver quality goods and quality services.
In the last 5 years, we have led the way in opening new markets with 240 trade agreements that remove foreign barriers to products bearing the proud stamp, Made in the USA. We propose to bring new hope and new jobs to storefronts and factories from South Boston to South Texas to South Central Los Angeles.
My administration is promoting free and fair trade to open up new markets for America's entrepreneurs and manufacturers and farmers to create jobs for American workers. Good jobs for the finest workers in the world, those whose products say, Made in the USA.
Tonight I want to speak about how we move forward and lay out a blueprint for an economy that's built to last. An economy built on American manufacturing. We have a huge opportunity at this moment to bring manufacturing back, but we have to seize it.
So if everyone agrees that manufacturing is a good thing, then how did cities like Detroit end up in ruins?
There are 2 major philosophies or ideologies with regard to trade. On one hand, you have the protectionists. On the other hand, you have the free traders. It really doesn't divide by party. It's really more philosophy. The protectionists believe that let's take care of our own. Let's manufacture here. Let's market to Americans. Let's take care of ourselves and not worry about anybody else. If we have to bring up trade barriers in order to make it more difficult for people to be able to import into this country. The free traders believe that the world is an interconnected place and that America has the ability to compete with anybody. and therefore let's open up markets around the world in order to create more demand, in order to create more opportunity.
So we opened up our markets. We had nothing to lose. And so the 50s and the 60s, we could manufacture very well. We could begin to open those markets. We had no competition, and we didn't see any job loss. However, when Japan, when Germany started ramping up their manufacturing in the 1970s and the 1980s, when Mexico and China and other countries also developed a manufacturing capacity, and we had these free trade policies, and we had no manufacturing policy in our country, then we started to see the devastating consequences. We started to see the trade deficits, and we started to see the job losses mounting up.
While Detroit might be looked at as the poster child for the decline of manufacturing, there are countless other examples out there. The story of Greenwood, Mississippi, is the story of many towns.
That was none other than the legendary Mr. Robert Johnson. Of course, this is 960 WABG in beautiful Greenwood, Mississippi. Online, it's the Awesome AM. Well, the thing that sold me about Greenwood, Mississippi was the fact that the radio station was here. And this is a classic station, it's a historic station, and it's been here since the 1950s. What sold a lot of other people on Greenwood was the fact that it's a quaint little Delta town.
Greenwood is a huge part of the Delta. I mean, it is I say all the time in my welcome speeches, you're truly in the Mississippi Delta when you're in Greenwood, Mississippi.
This area of the Mississippi Delta for hundreds of years has been known as the cotton capital of the world.
Cotton was the heyday here. That was our cash cow, so to speak. You know, that's what made this town in the first place, was cotton.
In the early 50s, the whole face of agriculture began to change. It was much more mechanized operation. And so people who had normally worked on the farms that surrounded this area were looking for jobs. And so that's when industry began to move into Greenwood.
Well, by the 1970s, the industrialization of this area probably had reached a zenith. There were a large number of companies in our industrial park. There were probably 4,000 to 5,000 industrial jobs, making everything from pianos to fire trucks to heavy machine tools.
During the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of those manufacturing facilities began to move out of Greenwood and moved overseas or to Mexico. And it left a real void here.
The town back in the 70s, later 70s, really did not even exist.
With many of the manufacturing jobs gone, Greenwood became almost like a ghost town.
The same thing was happening all across the country.
U.S. Steel Corporation today announced that it's permanently closing 16 plants.
Jones & Laughlin steel plant is shutting down for good.
A total of 5,000 steel workers employed at several plants here will soon lose their jobs.
The devastating news of yesterday that Bethlehem Steel will close its plant next year.
Some 66,000 more auto workers will be laid off next week.
General Motors confirmed it today. It is going to close plants employing almost 30,000 workers.
200 American steel mills shut down all or part of their operations. 31 auto plants closed for good.
The American trade deficit was supposed to be going down. It isn't.
In the 1970s and 80s, other countries began to open up to trade and invested in education and infrastructure. They supplied benefits to their domestic businesses and offered incentives to foreign investors. Under a burdensome tax code and new competition, company executives began looking outside the U.S. to increase their profitability. Over the next 30 years, companies that made their products in America began to close down their manufacturing divisions and began outsourcing that work to other countries.
One of the big myths about manufacturing job loss is that most of it has occurred because of automation or productivity or technology. That's simply not the case. I mean, does it take fewer steel workers to make a ton of steel than it did a couple decades ago? Yes, that is true. But we're making a lot more steel, and there's a lot more global demand for steel. So it doesn't necessarily follow that you need just the same amount of workers or fewer workers. The biggest challenge, really, in a lot of ways, has been globalization and outsourcing, is that we're sourcing more of this from abroad.
As technologies change, and especially as there's been an increase in communication, as we've got the ability to move products from one location to another and keep track of them much more carefully, and to be sure of the amount of time that it's going to take to get from point A to point B, it allows us to stretch out the production process more. We could do design of a particular product, for example, in the United States. We can send the specifications of that product to another country to actually put the product together. It might be stitched or finally constructed in a third country. Then that product can be put on a ship and sent back to the original country, perhaps where the design took place. So the changes in technology have allowed companies more flexibility. They've been able to move their productions in different parts of the world to take advantage of the comparative advantage that that country might actually have. Now, that's good when you're selected as a location or as a country where production or some aspect of production will take place. But that's bad to the firms that might be losing that particular business. And as companies move, they will move from higher cost locations to lower cost locations.
As someone I used to work for said, I have a great company. I can compete against any other company in the world, but I cannot compete against foreign governments. And that's what's happening now. People who are trying to make things in the United States find themselves competing against the Chinese government with essentially endless amounts of cash, or other foreign governments that'll put billions of dollars into helping these companies, and our companies are, trying to get a loan down at the bank and paying a normal interest rate and not getting any benefits, and it's almost impossible to do.
And the protesters have come.
These are the Wall Street guys.
On September 17th, 2011, protesters gathered inside the Wall Street district in New York City, one of their key issues being the growing income inequality and wealth distribution in the country. The rebel band of Americans was fed up with feeling the strain of a disappearing middle class. Without a strong manufacturing base, the gap in income between the middle class and the wealthiest Americans has grown strikingly in recent decades. In 1979, the peak of manufacturing employment, the average after-tax incomes of the richest Americans made 7.9 times more than those of the lower class. However, by 2007, the middle class made 24 times less than the wealthiest Americans, a more than tripling of the income gap.
When you have that kind of income and wealth distribution, it's a bad thing for society and for the economy, because this little handful of people at the top with all the money, they can't consume to keep an auto plant going. If you suddenly become a bazillionaire, okay, you might have about, 7 cars, but you're not gonna buy 70, The increase in your income is not gonna increase your consumption so hugely that you're gonna go out and buy 70 Ford pickup trucks. Whereas if that money was in the hands of a bunch of other households, they would.
The United States has evolved over the 200 plus years that we've been in existence. At the outset, we were pretty much inwardly focused. We were a fledgling nation trying to be able to claim the continent and be able to make sure that we were a success. We have had various times where we had promoted free trade or where we tried to be more protectionist. For example, during the Depression, one segment of society felt that the answer was to close the borders and let's take care of ourselves. And the Smoot-Hawley trade bill was passed that was very protectionist in nature, and quite frankly, it caused the Depression to become worse rather than better. Clearly today, we are a free trade country, and we believe that we still can compete effectively. At the same point in time, there's more and more concerns about unemployment here, underemployment here, and whether or not free trade is always fair trade, whether or not some of the countries that we're trading with are playing by fair rules, and therefore we are disadvantaged. And those are issues that clearly have to be focused on.
The issue of trade can't be solved by simply choosing an ideological side. Most likely, the answer is finding a balance somewhere in the middle. A better use of our time is to consider how we shop. After all, our actions usually speak louder to what we believe than our opinions anyway.
Through the recession, many of us woke up and found that our bellies were too big, our closets were too big, our houses were too big, our cars were too big, and that we needed to go on a diet.
What has happened in this orgy of debt over the past few years is that debt has made up the gap between what people can pay for with their jobs, where now remember that we haven't had real wage increases for 40 or so years. Debt is making up the difference between what they can afford with their jobs and what they are consuming.
I resent it when somebody comes to me and goes, tell me all the tricks that merchants and marketers use to trick me into buying goods. I'm not tricking you into buying anything. You have the responsibility to be able to look at it, process it, understand it here, and see whether it fits into the context of your life. We need to get beyond the thrill of the purchase to the pride of ownership.
Free traders think that by opening up markets, you're going to increase competition and you will lower prices, and that will benefit consumers everywhere. And if you look at how that comes into being in reality in the United States, it's kind of the Walmart effect. It's kind of like you can go to Walmart and get low prices. I mean, that's the free trade argument.
One of the things I love about my job is that retail is the dipstick of social change. So how we bought in 1850 and how we bought in 1950 and how we buy in 2012 is different. And those differences are a reflection of the changes in us and the changes in the culture that we live in.
Currently, most Americans do the majority of their shopping in today's big box retailers. It's no secret that these discount retailers rely heavily on imported goods to keep the everyday low prices they offer to Americans on a tight budget. But what we might not think about is how our demand for these low-cost goods affects manufacturing processes around the world. When millions of price-concerned consumers demand cheaper imported goods at our big box store, we unknowingly encourage companies to take whatever means necessary to compete, often resulting in the moving of production to a lower-cost country. While this has a positive effect on our wallets, it can have real consequences for small business owners trying to compete for the same shelf space.
I think American consumers are happy being able to pay $5 for a t-shirt. I mean, that's a nice thing to be able to save some money at the grocery store or at the superstore. But here's the challenge. You can't shop at Walmart if you don't have a job. And that's what communities are discovering right now.
Through General Welding, we were always bidding and quoting, and I ended up bidding these pipe posts, which was a structural steel support post that went inside a PVC fencing.
It was for certain. We had a $3.5 million project going there. We're making different pipes and galvanized and everything. We had it all tied up.
That became a real big part of our life. It was about a 10-year run. Then suddenly, I seen the sales dropping off, and they said, you got to lower your price, and I did, and then I lowered them more, and I lowered them more, and
Mark called me up. He said, Dad, what? I said, what happened? He said, we lost the job. Well, how could you lose the job? We had the job tied up. He said, somebody outbid us. Yeah, I said, where? He said, well, I don't know yet. He said, we lost it.
So I know, the material, I know the labor involved, I know what it takes to make this post. I make some calls. Of course, I've got friends that tell me some information, and then they tell me it's coming from Florida. And I thought, Florida? I'm 20 miles away from the plant I ship to. I want to see one of these pipes. They're 1,200 plus miles. Where are you getting them? What are they? I mean, Florida. So I finally get a pipe. It looked thinner to me. The galvanized coating wasn't great, and the weld was sure smaller than mine. It wasn't an AWS certified weld, so it's not the same quality, and that probably bothered me more than anything. I said, I had to follow all these specifications. Why don't they? Finally, I get out of them that it's coming from China. And I said, really? China's making them? This heavy 10 to 12 pound post can, ship it to the United States, to Florida, and then ship it up to me and can beat me by $3 a post? I couldn't believe it. I suddenly realized this is a whole nother, chapter in my life. I've never dealt with outside competition. It's not within the United States, it's somebody overseas.
And what bothered him more than losing the contract was the fact that he had to look his employees in the eyes and he had to lay some of them off.
He's not a corporate soul, if you will. He is a very kind human being, so it was like him telling his daughter or son they have to be let go.
Things started falling apart. We lost a lot of good people, a lot of people you got close with. He even had to lay me off for a little while. That's a sore subject, but...
You get yourself settled into one place, you think you're gonna be there, make a career, and just blows up in your face, and you gotta start from scratch again, start at the bottom.
The biggest thing that popped into my head was, what do I do now? I'm almost 50 years old. All I know is this. It's, I don't know anything else.
Suddenly I go from 69 employees to 31 employees, and things have changed. These were people that believed in Mark Yandel. They did what I needed to get done whenever I needed to get it done. If it was out in the cold, 40 foot up in a lift, but all of a sudden these people are in front of me. Now I've got to lay him off. That gave me everything.
When the bottom fell out, really, we're thinking about what to do. We're gonna maybe he have to sell his house and come back and live home here, in the apartment we put up. We're gonna have to sell everything we have to keep going to pay off what our mortgage is at, because nobody wants to buy the business. He must have had about 5 close calls like that where he's gonna close shop the next day.
That just hung on me. If I didn't make it, what would my parents think? What would my family think? And that was something I never hit before. I was worried about everybody all of a sudden, worried about what they would think if Mark went out.
It was February and I was at a wholesale show and a new buyer came in that I didn't recognize from the Smithsonian. And she said, we've changed how we're buying things and we no longer want your work. So in one sentence, I was done. It was totally dumbfounding how, for many years I was the top selling and this new buyer comes in and she says, nah, that's it, we don't want you. It just really complexing, just really a bad moment. It was early this spring. I was actually sitting at my desk and the phone rang. It was a friend of mine that I hadn't spoken to in a while and she was very excited, talking like a mile a minute. I couldn't imagine what was on her mind. And she said, Mary, I was just at the Smithsonian and she said, I saw stuff that kind of looks like yours and it was made in China. And I said, what are you talking about? And actually I was sitting there waiting for me to send a photograph to me and I was saying to myself, it's been a long time since, I even thought about any of this and I don't make anything for the Smithsonian anymore. What possibly could they have that could look like mine? And then the screen comes up and I'm just like, oh my God, this is just horrible. This is just like, how could they decide to buy something that's so inferior when they had something so long ago that worked? Being a small business owner is very hard here in the United States. It's very competitive. We're dealing not only with local business owners and national business owners, but globally as well. How does the actual product sell and how do you sell it in this huge global market is very difficult. A souvenir to me is something that's very special. When I travel abroad, I certainly want to purchase something that is handmade from that country. And when I think of people coming to the United States, when they go to a place like Smithsonian and they want to bring a piece of Americana home, and there isn't a thing in the store that's made in the United States, that's ludicrous. Come on.
I can see a scenario where manufacturing collapses in the United States. It's like a bad dream, but it could happen. I mean, you saw what happened during the last recession.
When you, as an economy, get rid of your manufacturing base, the results are very cataclysmic. You have a domino effect of decline that starts to affect everybody in every industry.
But what happens is all the businesses around the factory and in that city or town close down too. The dry cleaners, the diners, the bowling alleys, the doctors, the accountants, the banks, everything sooner or later goes because the job base that brought all the financial wherewithal into the town has disappeared, has moved abroad or somewhere else. So the whole town is essentially empty.
And when property values depreciate, now we have to lay off firefighters and police officers and teachers. And now we're not collecting enough revenue for the state to invest in education and higher education. So all these things are all interconnected.
When I started in this business, people said, well, high technology is going to be our saving grace. So it doesn't matter that we're moving certain manufacturing jobs offshore. But at least they've honestly stopped saying that because there's not much high technology made in the United States anymore. We have an enormous trade deficit.
The United States is a great country, but it has a number of fundamental imbalances, one of which is the trade imbalance.
The trade deficit sounds very esoteric for people, but here's what it is. You have goods that you're selling abroad. Those are your exports that you're making in the United States. Then you have goods that you're importing from overseas. Those are your imports. When you add the exports up and then you subtract the imports, that's your trade balance. For a long time in the United States, in fact, for several decades, we've had a trade deficit and has grown almost every year.
When you end up importing more than you export, you end up having to owe people money. And sometimes you have to borrow it from people who may or may not have the same interest that you have. And to the extent that you do that for the short term, it's not a problem. But to the extent that you're doing it on a recurring basis, and to a greater extent, it is a big problem. Ultimately, you need to produce more than you consume if you want the future to be better than the past.
Since the year 2000, we've lost about 5.5 million manufacturing jobs in this country, which, is only a little over 10 years, and that is a third of our manufacturing jobs. So that drop is almost unbelievable that we could have lost a third of those jobs in a decade, essentially. And when you look at the multiplier related to manufacturing jobs, most people believe that for every manufacturing job, there are 2 to 3 other jobs. So that really makes the 5.5 million translate into about 10 to 15 million jobs. And in the United States, there are 13.3 million people who are officially unemployed. So when you just think about it, that loss in manufacturing jobs is kind of the backbone that broke, that has caused this incredible unemployment in this country right now.
We chased the tech bubble in the 1990s and it popped. We chased the housing bubble and the Wall Street bubble last decade and it popped. There is no manufacturing bubble. It is sustainable. It's what we do well. It's a core competency of our country. And we look at other nations and they're fighting for manufacturing jobs. We're the only country that hasn't been doing that.
The town of Skowhegan and surrounding area has always dealt in the shoe manufacturing.
We used to have roughly 30,000 people not 30 years ago making shoes in the state. Now we're down to about 1,000. it's tough, I think, today for people to understand that to make a high-quality product safely is tough, and that's what we're up against all the time.
Today, with the philosophy and the way we're making shoes today and the quality level being this close to the customer, we're executing a real nice plan.
Checking for quality, checking margins, checking for threads. I stitch my left end first, and it'll go around, and it will come out, and the even stitches, the margin's gonna be even around the whole end. I put it on my plate, and it takes out the throat tie, and I put even my holes of the eyelaces into the computer flat, and that is it.
Knowing that we put shoes on a lot of people's feet, you know, it really is. It's something to be proud of, you know.
It's all about pride. You pass on good work because you want that next person to be able to do what they need to do. And yeah, it's all about pride.
By having New Balance in town, we're able to filter more of the economy all through the area. They're a family. They're part of our family in Skowhegan, and we don't know what we would do without them.
New Balance in Skowhegan provides a purpose. I heard one of our economic developers refer to it as a thread in the tapestry, and New Balance being one of the largest threads, one of the clearest threads. And I thought he put it really well. We are, and we're proud to be that. It's, again, part of the philosophy of the New Balance business model, is that we are in the communities. We're a business the community is proud to host.
If we can all agree that manufacturing is a good thing for the country as a whole, but we don't want to give up the low prices we've come to expect, then where do we go from here? If we want to see an increase in U.S. manufacturing, who can we trust to make it happen? In baseball, the purpose of a bunt is to advance a runner into a scoring position. In order to win, a sacrifice must be made. Who among us will step up to the plate and be willing to make the sacrifices to put American-made back on the shelves? Can we look to American companies?
You say the two words Louisville and Slugger together, there's no question in your mind what you're talking about. You're talking about baseball and the greatest brand in the history of the game of baseball. But there was a time, the 1970s, where the Louisville Slugger was actually made across the Ohio River in Jeffersonville, Indiana. And that was not something that sat very well with people who lived in Louisville, Kentucky. My goodness, how could a product called the Louisville Slugger be made in Jeffersonville, Indiana, when it always said Louisville, Kentucky? This is a baseball city, so we just have a wonderful baseball history. And in 1918, they signed a guy named Babe Ruth. And Babe Ruth was really the player who helped this company propel even further and become extremely popular because he was the first great home run hitter, and he was the guy who literally changed the game of baseball. And the company just continued to sign player after player. Lou Gehrig and Joe DiMaggio and Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente and Hank Aaron, and right on into stars of today. Well, the fact is, the headquarters of the company never left Louisville. The offices always were here. But manufacturing did, in fact, take place across the river in suburban Louisville and Jeffersonville, Indiana, which, you know, we all feel like that's part of Louisville, but it is in another state. And so that just did not sit very well with people. It was a business decision at that time, but Jack Hurwick has said numerous times that was one of the biggest mistakes that he ever made, was to take the company out of Louisville. The mayor of Louisville always had a goal to make sure that the manufacturing of the Louisville Slugger bat came back to Louisville, Kentucky, and it did, into this very building in 1996 when the manufacturing was moved back here, and it's been here ever since, and I don't see it going anyplace ever again.
Louisville Slugger's move back to Kentucky was a decision to protect the integrity of a brand. But if an American brand doesn't necessitate American-made to maintain its image these days, then why would a company move their production back to the US? Today, there are literally hundreds of American brands making their products across oceans, let alone state lines. What would it take to attract these companies back? Is it even possible? What is it that's keeping them from coming back?
The guy who owns the mom and pop shop oftentimes has a different motivation than the CEO of a multinational company. And here's why. The CEO of the multinational company has to answer to his shareholders every quarter. It's the quarterly earnings pressure. It's not a long-term sustainable business plan about how you could invest in capital to keep the jobs here a decade from now, 2 decades from now, how you can keep that long-term growth. It's about the next 90 days, literally. Whereas the small manufacturer says, I want a business that's going to be around for a generation, or for 2 generations, something that's going to help my community, help my family, help my country.
When you're running a public sector company, you have to be concerned about the shareholders. You have a legal responsibility and a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. And you could be sued if you don't properly discharge that fiduciary duty. And yes, that means you need to make profit and you need to try to maximize shareholder value. But it's not all about money.
Unless we can get the grip of Wall Street off of manufacturing, we're going to fall further behind.
So publicly traded companies being tied down by their responsibilities to shareholders seems to be a convenient out. But if it's so impossible to produce competitively priced goods in the US, then why are foreign companies taking up the mantle of the American worker? Does it make sense? Perhaps there's no better example than BMW, who bought a Super Bowl ad to ask just that.
Does it make sense that a German car company would break ground in Spartanburg, South Carolina and call it home?
Does it make sense that in the height of a recession, when most companies were bailing out,
That they would dig in, that they would find their latest design in California?
and customize it in 10 million different ways? Does it make sense?
Does it make sense?
Does it make sense
That a small town in the South
would make every X3?
Every X3 in the world.
It makes perfect sense.
The all-new BMW X3.
Yeah, some people don't like the idea that we have foreign companies that are coming to the United States and making things. I have to say, I'm not as concerned. I'm happy for any company that wants to invest in American workers and make stuff here. That makes me very, very happy.
If attracting foreign companies to manufacture in the US is the ticket to put Americans back to work, it will take the coordinated efforts of local communities. One example of a community that's doing this is Gwinnett County, Georgia.
Heddy's a German company and one of the world's biggest manufacturers of cabinet hardware, such as slides, hinges, and sliding and folding door hardware. And the US market, being a very important market, of course, deserves its own facility. And we knew roughly the geographic region that we wanted to go to. Gwinnett Chamber is extremely active, very business-minded, very, very helpful. They did the best job in showing us their story to show us the benefits for an employer who wants to move to Gwinnett. The facility CEC is the only one that we have in the United States in Gwinnett, Georgia.
Our economic development organization, Partnership Gwinnett, is a community-based organization. It has the county, the schools, the hospitals, the businesses, the cities, and the CIDs all involved in economic development.
What I have seen in economic development is there's communities that are reactionary, and they've decided they're going to sit back and they're going to respond to calls. And if that's your approach, I wish you a lot of luck. But to me, the strong communities have a plan, they have a strategy, and they go out and they aggressively go after what they have decided that is their best sales pitch.
When we started moving industry from the United States into Asia, into Mexico, Latin America, and so forth, those governments set up what they call special work areas for companies to move into. We could do that, I sincerely believe, today. We go to trips to China and South Korea and so forth, or Germany, we market the state of Georgia. And then once we get those companies lined up, we try to focus them on Gwinnett County. Move out of the city, find a low cost of doing business, and set up an infrastructure and a tax base that will attract companies to come back here. We have a lot of unemployed people right now in the United States, and those manufacturing jobs that could be employing Americans are employing people in other countries.
But what if we don't have the leadership in our communities to attract foreign manufacturers? And if American public companies are beholden to the whims of shareholders, then perhaps American manufacturing is left on the shoulders of American entrepreneurs.
One of the things that's always been great about America is Americans. At the outset of our country, we had way more than our fair share of great people. People that created the Constitution of the United States. People that helped to invent electricity. And we have been the inventors of many things that have changed our world and our society fundamentally. Much of that is done by small and medium-sized businesses, entrepreneurs that have an idea that end up creating a product or a service that then takes off.
Every town has its ups and downs. So we've certainly had our ups and downs. I mean, Freddie Carl, who is a native of Greenwood, and when he founded Viking Range Corporation, that's when we saw the turnaround in this town.
Mid-1980s, Fred Carl, who was one of my best friends growing up, had the brilliant idea to start manufacturing ranges that, to those of us who were Fred's close friends, we didn't get it at first, but after he finally made the point to me that he had discovered a niche that no one else in the appliance industry knew about, Viking Range was born.
We were building a new house in 1981, and I wanted a commercial range in our house. I was wondering why in the world isn't there a high-quality range on the market, so that's when I decided, well, there should be one, and it ought to be like a restaurant range because they're so cool looking, and they're also heavy-duty, and stainless steel looks good, so I went about designing one.
So that's when he brought manufacturing here to Greenwood. He made the statement, you know, that back then that if he couldn't do it in Greenwood, he wasn't going to do it at all. Fred, as he built Viking, he wanted to build Greenwood along with it, and that's exactly what he did. Now we have 4 plants here, besides our distribution center and our product support facility, plus our corporate offices, and then the hotel, the restaurants, and the spa, and the cooking school, and all that goes with it.
It gets back to it just being good business to invest in your community, and I think community development is everyone's job, and the local employers, I think, have a responsibility to contribute to that.
So over a multi-decade period, while industry was in steady state of decline and industry after industry was shutting its doors, Viking, thankfully, from my perspective, was creating more and more jobs in the community. So there was an interesting offset, and in many ways changed the culture of the community.
Viking probably, I think it's safe to say, is the lifeblood of the community here.
I think Freddie Carl brought that vision back to Greenwood. And once he did, then people, the momentum, I mean, it's just keep on building and building until what you see today.
Here at Viking, we make a high-quality product. It's not a cheap product. It's quite expensive, and it has to be very high quality. It's made in America, so we want anything made in America to be the very highest quality. Maintaining that quality is of the utmost importance to us as a company, and so important for the brand.
But even if entrepreneurs choose to make their products in America, and community leaders foster industry growth, will consumers care about anything other than the number on the price tag? Are we even capable of considering anything besides the bottom line?
The crisis of our 21st century existence is that I don't understand what the real value is. Let's just start with a t-shirt. I sourced the t-shirt in Sri Lanka. My wholesale price for it might be $1.98. It's a very good t-shirt. I bring it back to my distribution center. I sew a label into it in French. Doesn't say it's made in France. I relabel it not a t-shirt, but I call it an expedition t-shirt. I merchandise it beautifully inside the store. I've done theatrical lighting on it. The model looks really terrific. And it flies out the door at $32 each. That is the magic of fashion. That is that's the price that we pay for being victims rather than makers. We as consumers are deeply confused about value.
My father had a Shakespeare fishing pole, and I remember cleaning it, taking it apart, and it had screws you take out. And it was made in America. There was no question about it. It was quality product. You know, then I go and look at a fishing pole today, and it sounds like it's broke already when you buy it. It's just not quality. So as I'm reading things about China and global economy, and you know, I start looking in stores and flipping over things and just really realizing that not a lot of things or products are still made here. And I started to look at my own showroom at General Welding. A lot of things I thought were made in America weren't. That was the start, making a list in our own showroom, seeing what's really made here, and that was really the start of me thinking about where I was going. It was a shame when I lost overseas competition. It's not the time to spend money. It's not the time to do anything gutsy. It's just not the time. It's tough survival mode. We're cutting costs and everything, and I don't even want to tell my team or my family. I've got another idea.
One day, Mark had come into my office and said he was talking to a guy across the street about renting a building.
Mark called and he said, I have an idea. And I'm thinking, I'm sure you do. And he said, I'm thinking of opening up a store that's primarily made in America products.
Behind all the scenes as we're in the recession, I have to go get a building permit for this new business idea.
Mark Angel came in front of the town board and showed us a rendering of the building that he had just leased. And it was quite a unique conversation we had with him.
He said, well, Mark, you've done good with a lot of other things in your life, and you run a clean business. Good luck to you. But I said, you know, they said, I think you got a big challenge there to find made in America products. Made in America, made in America, made in America products.
Well, he talked to me about it, and I said, I don't think it's going to go, because I said, we're a welding shop. That's all we were. I said, if you open up like a country store, it's selling like a Walmart or a different like that. How are we going to ever compete?
He came up with it, and it took me, like I said, it was really a surprise, and I'm thinking, how the hell are we going to make this work?
It was sprung on me, and I thought he was crazy.
I thought he was out of his mind.
I don't know, you know, this is, yeah.
I remember distinctly thinking to myself, it's interesting and should last a couple of months.
Nobody operates a business out of pure patriotism. It's not smart. It isn't enlightened.
I think it's probably a little bit idealistic to think every day people are going to think, am I just buying stuff that's made in America? There are a million other reasons people want to buy things.
Design and branding has become an increasing part of the value of a product, and the actual production has become a far smaller part by most measures.
If consumers walk into a Walmart and are thinking of purchasing a crock pot, and they look at the crock pot and says, okay, well, this one is $25 and it was made in China, and here's another one for $35 made in the United States, and I'm guessing that a good percentage of customers are going to buy that $25 crock pot made in China.
If you would have asked me 5 years ago about how people viewed the Made in America brand, I would have said generally pretty lousy. They couldn't find American-made products on the shelves of most stores, and so consumers were like, yeah, that was nice a couple decades ago, but I haven't given it much thought lately.
Do you think there's examples of things that are products that people would buy, like let's say a flag, for instance, or something that they'd feel?
That's a good question. Would Americans, faced with a American flag made in China and a slightly more expensive flag made in the United States, on that one they might go with the American flag.
I am a sixth generation of the Annans. When you're making flags, as long as Annan flag makers have, your flag gets associated with very important events throughout history. And we're very proud of these events we've been associated with, from draping the coffin of Abraham Lincoln through Commodore Perry's first trip to the North Pole in 1910, to the flag that flew on Iwo Jima during World War II, to the flag that went to the moon in 1969. In business, if you're standing still, you're essentially dying. You have to be constantly evolving. Flag making would be considered a niche industry, but we're very competitive. Our evolution has been continual. If you look from the digital printing we now do compared to the old screen printing, it's not static. I think people sometimes feel that, oh, product got moved to India or China, and that's where it's always going to be made. And that's not so. Business is constantly flowing and evolving, and things will flow and evolve back here. We're seeing already, due to flexibility or logistic reasons or timing of speed of product to market, some companies are bringing products back to the United States and they're making them in more modern, efficient plants. And I think we'll see more of that, honestly. American flag, to me, is a very complex item because obviously it represents the ideas of the United States. It also, to me, has become much more of a powerful symbol since 9/11. I lost some friends in the towers of 9/11, and so I think in the last 10 years I've viewed the American flag differently than I used to. When you make it every day, you're worried about the workers being efficient, the fabric being dyed the right shade, the star fields having the right density of stitches in the stars. But then when something like 9/11 happens, you view the flag much differently. I think most people feel that it just makes sense to make the flag here.
I say my prayers every day. I believe in God above, and I hope the Made in America store is a great statement for our country.
I think that any business owner would probably agree that a risk is a big part of it, and Mark has never been afraid to take a risk.
I could just tell by looking at him he was nervous.
Mark is not a person to call and ever complain. I heard through the family grapevine.
We were all nervous.
When he came to me with the idea, like I said, he really surprised me. And I didn't know where he was going to go with it, and then, it just seemed to move really fast. It was like, gosh, weeks went by and it was like an idea to reality, boom.
I always go with what, I want to do, but I did have, for number one, it's a retail store. I found this location that's close to my general welding and fabricating, my headquarters, but it's set back off the road.
Everything he does is very risky, and sometimes I really don't think that it's going to work out for him.
Wasn't the best retail location, wasn't a lot of business around it.
The store doesn't work out, yes, it could help the business, General Welding, but it could also affect the business at General Welding too.
Where am I going to get the cash flow? Are people going to shop? Are they going to come back? Can I get people shopping? Can I get frequency visits? That was a big point. Can I get enough products was our number one concern. Nobody knew the research that goes into finding 100% made in America products.
It was endless labor hours of trying to find products that were 100% American made.
And we actually found only 40 products that were 100% made in America.
If you did find a product, maybe the wrapper was made somewhere else and the product was made here, he wanted the whole kit and caboodle. 100% is what I'm gonna go for.
You just step back and let him do his thing and hang on and hope it works.
And I set up, 3 rules. It has to be 100% made in America, has to be top quality, has to feed an American family. So I have to live by these rules too.
In Elma, which is really a little town outside of Buffalo, who's going to come to the store to buy these items? It's really a scary thought.
Can we pull this off? Will anybody come?
Are we
Wait till you hear this story, because when a small manufacturer
He had to lay off 40 employees, 60% of his workforce.
And he took action and he opened a store at a store in upstate New York.
found one store in Elma, New York,
Called Made in America.
For the Made in America store in East Aurora,
That only sells U.S.-made products.
Fully made in the USA.
Are things still made in America?
how great is that?
Wants one in every single state. Can you imagine it being like Walmart, but without the foreign goods?
I love the variety of goods he has there, too.
we're finding out that people really like all American products.
That discovery has led to international attention and put his Made in America store on the map.
I was amazed at people that came. Every day people came, buses came. Now we got buses from Iowa, Missouri, every place you can think of. It really made me feel good that finally something succeeded. One person could change the life of a town. I mean, it's wonderful. The son-in-law's back to work, all our friends are back to work, so he probably put another 20 people back to work.
Big kiss.
I'd like to put a store in every state. I mean, I'd like this store to be respected. I'd like it to be the roots so that this doesn't happen to our country again. We always have 50% of our products made in this country because our store is not just a retail store, it helps the manufacturers. We're about creating and saving jobs in the United States of America by increasing manufacturing. And if you bring manufacturing back, we can grow this country.
This idea that we have to make things in this country is back.
U.S. consumers would like to buy American.
It's a feeling that is surging.
It's not just where a corporation is based that's important. It's where it actually produces things.
We can compete on a global market if we make the choice to.
And we have to end up making a number of fundamental changes in order to try to revitalize America and make sure that we can once again make Made in America a reality.
So, you currently produce 25% in the States.
Yes, we do.
So, what would it take to make that more?
You know, the key to making more is creating more demand for U.S. product. We've got a number of programs that we've put in place since we met last, and it's starting to work. We are exporting more than we were. We've added 60 new jobs, and we've really got the factory fired up about exporting American-made quality. Not only have we seen the demand for those products grow in the U.S., but we've seen it start to grow internationally. Japan, Korea, and China, all three markets clearly have subset of consumers that are seeking out an American-made product.
Did you ever think this would happen?
No, I never thought this was going to happen. I was very excited when I got a call back and they were interested in my product. And I think that they most likely called because of the media change and because of the demand for more handmade product. Here in America, if people expressed it, if they showed it, and they moved towards that movement of demanding more of American-made products and showed that behavior themselves, by shopping more locally and doing things, that small change will occur, which will then snowball into larger change. It's got to happen. I mean, there's no other way.
So you're talking to me earlier about providing for the family.
Every man wants to provide for his family. That's the natural thing to do. But being an entrepreneur, I have a lot of livelihoods at stake. So it means a lot more to me. I put in, every day I have to give 110%.
Now, have you ever thought about what if you fail?
That's not an option. I have great family, great friends. We put a lot into this, and at some point you just have to believe.
While these stories seem to have happy endings, and while cities like Detroit are redefining themselves, we are far from being out of the woods. Cities and towns everywhere stand as clear examples of the warnings of abandoning manufacturing. Perhaps the biggest change that consumers can make to affect American manufacturing is to look beyond the price of a good and look at the overall price to the health of this nation. Buying locally where it's available and American where it's reasonable has its effects seen and unseen on your fellow citizen. As you're deciding on which product you wish to buy, look at the label. Think about the relationship you have with where an item is made. Who's behind your decision? What part of its production chain has the biggest impact on where you live? There is no question that we have a relationship between the products we buy and make in America. The question is, what kind of a relationship do you want? How deep do you want to go? The bases are loaded. We're down by 3. The count is full, and it's up to us.
Back in my hometown, watching the smoke, it never stops. I'm gonna live here when I'm older. We're making a new sound and letting the people build